Are you still not losing fat even though you feel like you're trying? If that's the case, you're probably making one of these 3 mistakes. Now, when it comes to making mistakes, I have made a lot of mistakes when it comes to fat loss. That was me when I was probably at my heaviest, at my least confident, and could never seem to make a diet stick. That was me last year after a bodybuilding prep, 21 weeks of dieting, and I competed the year before as well, and that was in 2023, and that was my first proper bodybuilding prep. And it taught me a few things, and it made me acknowledge the mistakes that I used to make and why I could never make a diet work. Now, there are 3 major mistakes that people tend to make, and I would say these are the ones that held me back for years, and I'd consider the 3rd one to be the most important. You'll be surprised what the first one is. It's not actually anything that you need to implement, it's how you need to think, and what you need to realize is the problem. And the problem a lot of the time when it comes to dropping body fat is you. It's your mindset, it's your ability to be consistent, it's your discipline, it's your excuses. And I made so many excuses for years. I couldn't be disciplined, I struggled with being consistent, and I'd always try to do a little bit too much to make it a quick fix, because I knew that once it got past a certain amount of weeks of dieting, I'd struggle. The discipline aspect needed to change. I needed to be willing to make more sacrifices, and I needed to stop making fucking excuses. Mindset is going to be the first thing that you need to fix. And the first mistake that people tend to make is expecting a little bit too much to happen a little bit too soon, and expectations of being perfect. You aren't ever going to be perfect in any diet phase, but you do need to make sacrifices. You do need to be willing to make sacrifices and say no. Say no to social occasions at times if you know that you can't be controlled. Say no to takeaways when the family's making an order. Saying no to drinks when drinks are present. Go out, be sober, or have a lot less, be a lot more considerate towards the drinks that's going in. It's whatever needs to work and whatever you would consider to be balanced, and whatever's going to keep you the most consistent throughout the process. But then the expectation of what you should expect results wise in whatever time frame also may need to change. If you want to make the most out of a 10-week diet, be realistic. How much fat needs to come off? How much weight do you feel like you need to lose? What does that rate of loss need to be per week? Are you someone that's looking to drop 10 kilos in 10 weeks? Well, at that point, there's probably going to be some fucking graft that needs to come into play. And if that's the case, a lot of discipline, a lot of effort, and a lot of sacrifice needs to be there. But if you're looking to drop 10 kilos over 16, 18 or 20 weeks, it might mean that you've got a little bit more leeway, a little bit more flexibility, and at that point, you might need to make less sacrifices. But the discipline and the consistency needs to be there. And you're gonna have to embrace the fucking suck a little bit. It was the biggest thing for me and the biggest issue for me that I had for years. Making excuses for myself and just believing that I couldn't actually do the things that eventually now I'm able to do. And the more time that you spend doing things that are a little bit more difficult, a little bit uncomfortable and hard to do, the more you reaffirm that you're able to do these things and the more confident you become within yourself. So fix that first. Control the variables that you can control and forget about the ones that you can't. You might not be able to control something that happens in life at times, but you can control what goes in your gob, and you also may be able to control the amount of effort that you put into your cardio, the amount of effort that you put into your training sessions, and the amount of steps that you do per day that's going to allow you to burn more calories per week, you can control. Mistake number 2, it's going balls to the fucking wall from the off. If you're looking to drop fat fast, sometimes doing a little bit less is actually going to equal a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying be a lazy fucker. I'm not saying do less and expect greater results. No, I'm expecting you to be realistic and understand that if you go from doing nothing, minimal steps, no cardio, training half-hearted and eating shit every day, to tracking every single meal or following the meal plan and doing loads of cardio, 30 minutes daily, doing 10k steps when you were doing 3k a day before, be realistic, you ain't gonna be able to stick to that. Now, understand that to an extent, there is going to be a level of a push in a diet if you want to achieve big things where it isn't going to be sustainable for a longer period of time. There may need to be weeks where you push and need to be weeks where you pull back. And that is just the expectation that you've got to set for yourself, and understand that to achieve big things, there are going to need to be sacrifices. There are going to be periods of time where you're pushing a little bit more. But the best thing that you can do is set yourself a realistic target to begin with, maybe push yourself a little bit more, but don't just go balls to the wall and do loads to the point where you burn out, because you've got got to then balance that alongside life as well, because life is still going to carry on. So what you do and how hard you push is relative to what you're doing right now. So if you're doing zero cardio right now, if you're doing half-hearted training sessions, if you're not tracking your food and eating shit multiple times a week and takeaways and having 1 to 2 meals per day with a bunch of snacks, then probably start with food and maybe a little bit of cardio, and then focus on those 2 variables to begin with. So being consistent with food, having no takeaways, tracking your food or following a meal plan, having set meals that you have across each day. Be consistent with that aspect. With cardio, if you're doing nothing right now, then start with maybe 10 minutes post-workout. With your training sessions, just focus on training a bit harder, because although we are there to build muscle and maintain muscle tissue, so at the end of the day, it's still going to be a means to be able to burn some more calories through the intensity that you're going to be able to put into your training. Start small and build up over time. Don't make the mistake of doing too much all at once, because it will fucking bite you in the arse. And the third, and probably the most important mistake, the worst one to make, is not tracking the data. Can't make a change if you don't know what's fucking going on. So when it comes to people that I work with, when it comes to my own progress, it's about tracking the variables that matter. Your scale weight, your pictures, your visuals. You don't just look in the mirror and think to yourself, I'm not losing any weight. Why do I not look any different? Because from a day-to-day basis, you see yourself all the time. So if you just look at the visuals from looking at the mirror, you ain't gonna see any changes. So what I want you to start doing is start tracking the data that matters. So the variables that are gonna be important is gonna be your scale weight. Tracking this on a regular basis. If you just track your scale weight once a week, it's not fucking Slimming World. What people tend to find is with things like Slimming World, what a lot of people tend to do when they're overweight is it tracks your weight in the evening after you've had a lot of food, a lot of water, or what people tend to do is fast all day long and get to the evening just to weigh themselves and be a little bit less on that scale. Now, if you just weigh yourself once a week, but you do it fasted in the morning, if we just take this as an example, from Saturday through to Saturday, your weight could be the exact same, but across the week, the average in comparison to the previous week could be lower, just because what you've actually done throughout the week, you might have hit a new low in comparison to the previous week, but if you don't track that on a regular basis, you ain't gonna know. So tracking your scale weight on a regular basis is gonna make a massive difference from an understanding perspective. And the way that we can kind of gauge an average is gonna be through things like apps called Happy Scale. You can log your body weight on there, and then when you do log your body weight through that, if you log it on a consistent basis, it's gonna give you an average and a rate of loss that you can expect to see every single week. So we use that as a metric. And another thing is taking photos. If you don't take photos, you have nothing to compare to. Don't just look in the mirror and expect things to change. Like I said, you see yourself every single fucking day. That visual in the mirror is, in your eyes, never gonna change. Whilst when you actually start to put the work in, when you're consistent, when you're putting in the effort, and when you are controlling the variables like food, like cardio, like steps, if the visuals start to change and also cross-reference that with the scale weight, if that also starts to change, they are going to work hand in hand to the point where we will start to see some sort of physical change. Now, can one change without the other? Yes, but that's why we need to track both. If the scale weight's moving, but visually things don't look like they're changing, it's only a matter of time. If the scale weight's not changing, but visually, when you're comparing the pictures, they're changing, happy fucking days. You don't walk around with a tattoo on your forehead that tells you how much you weigh. So people do not give a fuck about that. What you should care about the most is going to be how you look, because that, at the end of the day, is what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve a particular look. You're trying to lose fat. It's not a weight loss competition. It's about how much fat can you lose and how much weight can you potentially drop to bring you at your best, to bring you to be your most confident. That's what matters the most. The scale weight is a metric and a bit of data. It's not something to get caught up with, and sometimes it ain't gonna move. But if you're ticking the boxes daily, if you're doing the right things, if you're hungry, if you are sticking to being in a calorie deficit and doing the cardio that's needed, that's required, and going into every session with a level of intent, things will change. It's just a matter of time. And if things aren't changing, the scale weight isn't adjusting, and your body has become adaptive to what you're currently doing, because it happens. There is a thing such as adaptive thermogenesis, where your body will start to adapt to the amount that you're eating if you're being consistent. It will start to adapt to the amount of cardio and the expenditure that you're doing daily. So what we then need to do is make a change. But without actually tracking the data and without knowing how you're changing physically, you are literally pissing in the wind. And the biggest mistake that people make is going to be not tracking the data relevant, which is why coaching works a treat, because people actually track the data because they're being held accountable. Whilst when they do it themselves, they just look at themselves and go, well, what's the fucking point? I'm not changing. But you're not changing because you don't know. And you can't change anything because you don't understand if you're moving in the right direction, which is when people start to do a little bit too much, because that is what leads people to doing too much, too soon, and eating too little, too soon, to the point where they cannot adhere to the plan. Remember, everyone has got the capability to drop body fat. It's just about finding what works for you and what can actually make you the most consistent version of yourself. And sometimes that might mean imperfect action, reflecting, which leads to better action and better results over time, because no one ever starts as the finished product. And we're all still working at becoming the best version of ourselves, even me. And I will always try to be a little bit better. And we're all going to be on that same journey together. And I hate using that word. Journey. We're on a journey, but we are. If you did find this useful, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with a mate who also could listen to this and take some value from it. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.